The evening sun was setting behind the old brick buildings when a woman in her mid-30s stepped off the city bus. Her name was Lucia Reyes, and she had just finished working 12 hours at a small dry cleaning shop on the other side of town. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and her hands still smelled faintly of steam and fabric softener. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't going straight home. She stood at the corner of the street, looking at a flyer taped to a lamppost. It was wrinkled from the rain, but she could still read the words. Free piano lessons. Beginner's welcome. Community center. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Lucia had walked past this flyer at least 20 times. Every time she told herself the same thing. Maybe next week. Maybe when things slow down. Maybe when her daughter got a little older. But weeks turned into months, and she never went. Tonight, something inside her finally said enough. She crossed the street and walked toward the community center. It was a plain building with chipped paint and a wooden sign above the door. Nothing fancy. Just a place where people from the neighborhood came to take classes, hold meetings, or let their kids play basketball in the small gym. When she pushed open the door, the smell of old carpet and lemon cleaner filled her nose. A few people sat in the hallway on plastic chairs, waiting for different classes to begin. Lucia followed the signs until she found a room at the end of the corridor. A handwritten note on the door said Piano Class Room 14. She stood outside for a moment, suddenly feeling foolish. What was she doing here? She was a grown woman with bills to pay and a child to raise. She had never played a single note on a piano in her entire life. She didn't even know how to read music. But then she remembered the sound. That beautiful, heartbreaking sound she had heard one night many years ago, coming from an open window in a neighborhood she no longer lived in. A man had been playing the piano in his apartment, and Lucia had stopped on the sidewalk and listened until the music ended. She didn't know the name of the song. She didn't know anything about classical music, but she remembered the way it made her feel. Like the whole world had gone, quiet just for her. She had been chasing that feeling ever since. Lucia opened the door and stepped inside. The room was small and simple. About 15 chairs were arranged in rows, and an old upright piano sat at the front. Most of the seats were already taken. There were teenagers scrolling through their phones, a few older men and women chatting quietly, and a couple of young adults who looked like college students. No one looked up when she walked in. She found a seat in the back row and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. A moment later, the instructor arrived. He was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He introduced himself and began explaining the basics of the piano, the keys, the notes, the difference between sharps and flats. Lucia listened carefully, but she already knew she was behind. The teenagers seemed bored, like they had heard all of this before. The older students nodded along like it was a pleasant review. But for Lucia, every word was new. Every concept felt like climbing a steep hill. When the instructor asked everyone to come up and try a few notes on the piano, Lucia waited until the very end. She watched the others play simple melodies with ease. Some of them made mistakes, but they laughed it off. When it was finally her turn, she sat down on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. Her hands were rough. Years of pressing clothes and handling hot irons had left her skin dry and calloused. She pressed a key, and the note rang out louder than she expected. A few students glanced at her. She felt her face grow warm. The instructor smiled kindly and showed her how to position her fingers. She tried again. This time, the note was softer, but her hand cramped up almost immediately. She pulled back and apologized. "Don't worry," the instructor said gently. "Everyone starts somewhere." But Lucia could see the look in some of the students' eyes. A quiet pity, a silent assumption. She was just a tired woman trying something too late in life. She probably wouldn't last more than a few weeks after class. She walked home in the dark. Her daughter was already asleep when she got there, curled up on the couch with the television still on. Lucia turned it off, carried her to bed, and kissed her forehead. Then she sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the wall. She thought about quitting. It would be easy. No one would notice. No one would care. She could go back to her routine and forget the whole thing. But then she pulled out her phone and opened a music app. She searched for piano music and pressed play. The notes filled the small kitchen, soft and slow at first, then rising like a wave. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her dot. This was what she wanted. Not just to hear the music, but to make it. To feel it under her fingertips. To finally speak in a language she had only ever listened to. The next morning, Lucia went to a dollar store and bought a large piece of cardboard and a black marker. That night, after her daughter went to bed, she sat at the kitchen table and carefully drew a piano keyboard. 88 keys. She counted them twice to make sure. She placed the cardboard on the table and positioned her fingers over the silent keys. She played along with the music on her phone, pressing down on the paper as if it were real. There was no sound, of course, just the soft tap of her fingertips against the cardboard. But in her mind, she could hear everything. She practiced like this every night for weeks. Her neighbors probably thought she was strange. Her coworkers had no idea. Even her daughter didn't fully understand why her mother spent so much time at the kitchen table after dark. Lucia told no one about the piano class. She was too afraid to admit what she was hoping for. Too scared to say out loud that she wanted to become something more than what life had handed her. So she kept it to herself. A quiet dream. A secret goal. At the community center, she remained the slowest student. Her fingers still fumbled. Her timing was still off. The instructor corrected her gently, again and again. Some of the younger students had already moved on to more advanced lessons, while Lucia was still stuck on the basics. But she didn't give up. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she showed up. Every night, she practiced on her cardboard piano. And slowly, something began to shift. The notes started to make sense. The music began to feel less like a mystery and more like a map. She didn't know it yet, but she was laying the foundation for something no one would ever expect. Not her coworkers. Not her classmates. Not even the kind instructor who had watched her struggle from the very first day. Lucia Reyes was just getting started, and the world had no idea what was coming. 6 months had passed since Lucia first walked into that piano class, and not much had seemed to change on the surface. She still sat in the back row. She still made mistakes that the younger students had stopped making weeks ago, and she still caught those quiet looks from the others whenever her fingers tripped over the keys. The instructor, a patient man named Mr. Brennan, never made her feel small. He would walk over to her seat, lean down gently, and guide her hands into the right position. He never sighed. He never rolled his eyes. But Lucia could see the truth in the room. She was the one who didn't belong. There was a teenager in the front row who played beautifully. He had only been coming to class for 3 months, but he already moved through songs like water flowing downhill. Easy, natural, effortless. When he played, the whole room listened. When Lucia played, people looked at their phones. She tried not to let it bother her. She reminded herself why she was there. Not for attention, not for praise. Just for that feeling she had been chasing since she was a young woman standing on a sidewalk, listening to music float out of a stranger's window. But some nights, it was hard. One evening after class, she overheard 2 students talking near the exit. They didn't know she was behind them, pulling on her coat and gathering her bag. "I feel kind of bad for her," one of them whispered. "She's been coming here forever, and still can't get through a simple scale. I know, the other one replied. She's nice, but maybe the piano just isn't for her. Lucia froze. Her chest tightened. She waited until they left before walking out the door, her eyes stinging but refusing to cry. That night, she didn't practice. She sat at her kitchen table and stared at the cardboard keyboard she had made all those months ago. The edges were worn now. Some of the marker had faded from where her fingers pressed down again and again. It looked sad and silly. A grown woman pretending to play the piano on a piece of cardboard. What was she doing? Her daughter walked into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. She was only 7 years old, but she always seemed to know when something was wrong. Mama, why are you sad? Lucia shook her head and smiled. I'm not sad, baby. Just tired. Her daughter climbed onto her lap and looked at the cardboard piano. Are you going to play tonight? I don't know, Lucia said quietly. Maybe not. The little girl reached out and pressed one of the drawn keys. There was no sound, of course. Just paper under her fingertip. But she smiled anyway. I like when you play, Mama, even if it's quiet. Something broke open inside Lucia. She pulled her daughter close and held her for a long moment. Then she kissed the top of her head and sent her back to bed. When the apartment was silent again, Lucia looked at the cardboard piano. She thought about what those students had said. She thought about all the times she had stumbled, all the embarrassed glances, all the moments when she felt invisible. And then she picked up her phone, opened the music app, and pressed play. The notes filled the room, soft, beautiful, familiar. She placed her hands on the cardboard and began to move her fingers, pressing down on keys that made no sound, following the rhythm of the song in her mind. She wasn't going to quit. Not tonight. Not ever. The next week, something unexpected happened at the community center. A local church had donated an old upright piano. It wasn't in the best shape. The wood was scratched, and a few of the keys stuck when you pressed them too hard. But it worked. And the center didn't have room for it in the main hall, so they placed it in a small storage room at the back of the building. Lucia noticed it one evening when she stayed behind to use the bathroom. The door to the storage room was open, and she saw the piano sitting in the corner, surrounded by folding chairs and boxes of old decorations. She looked around. No one was watching. She walked inside and sat down on the bench. The keys were cool under her fingers. She pressed one gently, and a soft note rang out. It wasn't perfect. It was slightly out of tune. But it was real. For the first time in 6 months, she was playing a real piano alone. She stayed for an hour that night, then 2 hours the next night, then 3. She began coming to the community center early, before anyone else arrived, and staying late after everyone else had left. The janitor saw her once and just nodded, assuming she had permission. She didn't tell anyone. Not Mr. Brennan, not her classmates, not even her daughter. Every night, while the world slept, Lucia sat in that dusty storage room and practiced. She made mistakes. She hit wrong notes. She stopped and started and stopped again. But she kept going. She played the same simple songs over and over until her fingers knew them by heart. Then she moved on to harder pieces. Songs she had only ever heard through her headphones on the bus ride home from work. Songs that made her cry. Songs that made her feel alive. Her cardboard piano had taught her how to imagine the music. But this real piano taught her how to feel it. She started bringing her phone and recording her sessions. Not to show anyone, just to listen back and hear where she went wrong. She would play the recording on her way to work the next morning, cringing at her mistakes, but also noticing the small improvements. A cleaner note here, a smoother transition there. Week after week, she got better. But in class, she stayed quiet. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't volunteer to play in front of the group. She still sat in the back row and let the others go first. When Mr. Brennan asked if she wanted to try a new piece, she would shake her head and say she wasn't ready yet. No one suspected anything got to them. She was still the slow student, the one who struggled, the one who tried hard but never quite caught up. But late at night, when the storage room was dark, except for a single flickering light, Lucia was becoming someone else. She didn't know how far she could go. She didn't know if any of this would lead to anything. All she knew was that the music had taken root inside her, and it wasn't letting go. One night, after finishing a piece she had been working on for weeks, she sat back on the bench and let out a long breath. Her fingers ached. Her eyes were heavy, but her heart was full. She looked at the old piano and whispered, "Thank you." Then she stood up, turned off the light, and walked home under the stars. Nobody in the world knew what she was building in that little room. Not yet, but the time was coming when they would all find out. And when that moment arrived, no one would ever look at Lucia Reyes the same way again. 3 more months passed, and the storage room became Lucia's second home. She knew every crack in the walls, every squeak in the old wooden bench, every stubborn key that stuck if you pressed it too hard. The flickering light above the piano had become a kind of friend, keeping her company through the long, quiet hours of the night. Nobody at the community center paid attention to her comings and goings. The janitor had gotten used to seeing her slip through the back door after hours. He never asked questions. Maybe he understood. Maybe he had his own dreams once, hidden away where no one could see. Lucia's routine never changed. She would finish her shift at the dry cleaning shop around 6 in the evening. Then she would rush home, cook dinner for her daughter, help with homework, read a bedtime story, and wait until the little girl fell asleep. Only then would she grab her coat and walk the 4 blocks to the community center. Most nights, she didn't get home until after midnight. She would sleep for a few hours, wake up before sunrise, and start the whole thing over again. It was exhausting. Her body begged her to stop, but something inside her refused to listen. She had discovered a feeling she hadn't known in years: purpose. During those late nights in the storage room, Lucia wasn't just practicing random songs. She had found something bigger, something that scared her and excited her at the same time. It started when she was scrolling through videos on her phone during a lunch break at work. She came across a recording of a man playing a piece of classical music on a grand piano. The title said it was called Ballade No. 1 in G minor, composed by someone named Chopin over 100 years ago. She pressed play, and for the next 12 minutes, she forgot to breathe. The music was unlike anything she had ever heard. It started slow and sad, like someone remembering a lost love. Then it built and twisted, climbing higher and higher until it exploded into something wild and desperate. And just when she thought it couldn't go any further, it softened again, breaking her heart all over. By the end, she had tears running down her face. A coworker walked by and asked if she was okay. Lucia nodded and wiped her eyes, pretending it was allergies. That night, she searched for the sheet music online. When she saw it, her stomach dropped. Page after page of notes, complicated rhythms, impossible finger movements. This was not a song for beginners. This was a piece that professional pianists spent years trying to master. She should have closed the page and picked something easier. That would have been the smart thing to do. But Lucia had never done things the smart way. She had always done them the hard way. She printed the sheet music at the public library the next morning and brought it to the storage room that night. She placed it on the piano and stared at the first page for a long time. Then she pressed the first note. It took her 2 weeks just to learn the opening. Her fingers cramped. Her wrists ached. Some nights she wanted to throw the papers across the room and never come back. But every time she got close to giving up, she would close her eyes and remember how the music made her feel when she first heard it. That feeling was worth the pain. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, she began to learn. She broke the piece into tiny sections, sometimes just a few notes at a time. She played them over and over until her hands knew them without thinking. Then she would move on to the next section, and the next, and the next. Some nights she made no progress at all. Other nights something would click, and a whole passage would suddenly make sense. Those were the nights that kept her going. Back in class, nothing seemed different. Lucia still sat in the back. She still played simple songs when Mr. Brennan asked. She still made small mistakes that the other students had long stopped making. But Mr. Brennan started to notice something. He couldn't explain it exactly. There was a change in the way she touched the keys. A softness. A confidence. It was subtle, like the first green leaves pushing through the soil at the end of winter. One evening after class, he stopped her before she left. "You've been improving," he said kindly. "I can hear it." Lucia felt her face grow warm. "Thank you. I've just been practicing a little more." He smiled. "Keep it up. You have something, Lucia. I don't know what it is yet, but it's there." She thanked him again and hurried out the door, her heart pounding. She wasn't ready for anyone to know. Not yet. The music was still hers, still hidden, still safe in that little storage room where no one could judge it. At home, her daughter had started noticing things too. Lucia's fingers would sometimes move on their own while she washed dishes or folded laundry. Tiny invisible patterns. Silent songs. "Mama, are you playing the piano in your head again?" her daughter asked one night. Lucia laughed and kissed her forehead. "Maybe. Is that silly?" "No," the little girl said seriously. "I think it's magic." Magic. That was a good word for it. By now, Lucia had been working on the Chopin piece for nearly 3 months. She still couldn't play it perfectly. There were sections that tripped her up every time. But she could feel it coming together, like pieces of a puzzle slowly finding their place. She recorded herself one night and played it back on her headphones during the bus ride to work. For the first time, she didn't cringe. She didn't feel embarrassed. She felt proud. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was hers. She still had no idea what she was going to do with this music. She had no plans to perform, no dreams of being discovered. She was just a woman in a storage room, playing for an audience of no one. But deep down, something was whispering to her. A quiet voice that said this was not the end of the story. That all these nights, all these sacrifices, all these silent hours were leading somewhere. She didn't know where. She didn't know when, but she could feel it coming. One night, after finishing the final passage of the piece for the first time without stopping, Lucia sat back and let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled. Her eyes burned. She looked around the empty room, the stacked chairs, the dusty boxes, the flickering light above, and she smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had found something that was truly hers. Not her job, not her responsibilities, not the life that circumstances had handed her. This music, this moment, this dream. It belonged to her alone. And no one could ever take it away. It was a cold Tuesday evening in early December when Mr. Brennan made the announcement that would change everything. The class had just finished their warm-up exercises, and everyone was settling back into their seats. Lucia sat in her usual spot in the back row, her hands folded quietly in her lap. She had been coming to this class for almost a year now. In some ways, it felt like a lifetime. In other ways, It felt like she had only just begun. Mr. Brennan stood at the front of the room and cleared his throat. He had a piece of paper in his hand, and there was a small smile on his face. "I have some exciting news," he said. "The community center is hosting its annual Winter Talent Showcase next month. It's a chance for students from all the different classes to perform in front of family, friends, and neighbors. Piano, guitar, singing, dancing. Everyone is welcome to participate." A murmur went through the room. Some of the younger students looked excited. Others looked nervous. A few of the older ones shrugged like it was no big deal. "It's completely voluntary," Mr. Brennan continued. "No pressure at all. But I think it would be wonderful if some of you signed up. It's a great opportunity to share what you've been working on." He pinned the sign-up sheet to the bulletin board near the door and told everyone to add their names if they were interested. Then he moved on with the lesson. Lucia barely heard a word he said after that. Her mind was spinning. A talent showcase. A real performance. An audience. She had never performed in front of anyone in her life. Not once. Even in school as a child, she had always found ways to avoid the spotlight. She was the girl who stood in the back row during choir, the one who never raised her hand, the one who preferred to watch rather than be watched. But something was different now. For months, she had been playing alone in that storage room, pouring her heart into the keys, learning a piece of music that was never meant for someone like her. And every night, when she finished playing, a small voice inside her asked the same question. What is all this for? She didn't have an answer. She had told herself it was just for her, just a private dream, just a way to feel alive after years of feeling invisible. But now, sitting in that classroom with the sign-up sheet pinned to the wall, she realized something. Maybe it wasn't just for her. Maybe it never had been. After class, she stayed behind and watched the other students write their names on the sheet. The talented teenager from the front row signed up first, choosing a slot in the middle of the program. A few others followed. Simple pieces. Safe choices. When the room was nearly empty, Lucia walked over to the bulletin board. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the paper. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. She wrote her name in the very last slot. And she put the pen down and walked out before anyone could see. The next day at work, she could barely focus. She kept thinking about what she had done. Part of her wanted to go back and cross out her name. Pretend it never happened. Go back to being invisible. But another part of her, a stronger part, refused. That night, she went to the storage room earlier than usual. She sat down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. But she didn't play right away. She just sat there, breathing slowly, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. She thought about her daughter, about the little girl who believed her mother was doing something magical. She thought about all the nights she had spent practicing on a cardboard keyboard, all the times she had been laughed at or overlooked, all the moments she had wanted to quit, but didn't. This was what it had all been leading to. She took a deep breath and began to play. The Chopin piece filled the room, soft at first, then building like a wave. Her fingers moved with a certainty she hadn't felt before. She made a few mistakes, but she didn't stop. She kept going, letting the music carry her forward. When she finished, she sat in the silence and let the last note fade into the air. Her heart was pounding, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from hope. A few days later, Mr. Brennan pulled her aside after class. He had a concerned look on his face. "Lucia, I saw your name on the sign-up sheet," he said gently. "I'm glad you want to participate, but I wanted to check in with you. Have you thought about what piece you'd like to play?" She hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about the Chopin. Not a single soul. "I have something in mind," she said quietly. He nodded slowly. I just want to make sure you're comfortable. The showcase can be a little overwhelming, especially for newer students. Maybe something simple would be best? Something from the beginner's book? Lucia looked at him. She could see the kindness in his eyes. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to protect her from embarrassment, but he didn't know. He couldn't possibly know. Thank you, she said softly. I'll think about it. She walked home that night with his words echoing in her head. Something simple. Something safe. Something that wouldn't surprise anyone or make them expect too much. But that wasn't what she wanted. Not anymore. She wanted to be seen. Really seen. For who she had become, not who everyone thought she was. The weeks leading up to the showcase passed quickly. Lucia practiced harder than ever. She played the piece so many times that her fingers knew it like an old friend. She played it when she was tired. She played it when she was scared. She played it when she doubted herself. And slowly, the doubt began to fade. Her daughter noticed the change. One night, while Lucia was washing dishes, the little girl tugged at her sleeve. Mama, are you going to play your piano for people? Lucia smiled. Yes, baby. I am. Are you scared? She thought about the question. A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. But now, the answer was different. A little, she admitted. But I think being scared is okay. It means you're doing something that matters. Her daughter nodded seriously, like this was the wisest thing she had ever heard. The night before the showcase, Lucia went to the storage room one last time. She sat down at the old piano and ran her fingers lightly over the keys. Tomorrow, she would play in front of a real audience. Tomorrow, everything she had worked for would be out in the open. She closed her eyes and played the piece from beginning to end. No mistakes. No hesitation. Just the music, flowing through her like water dot. When she finished, she whispered a quiet thank you to the empty room, to the flickering light, to the old piano that had given her so much. Then she stood up, turned off the light, and walked out into the cold night air. Tomorrow, the world would finally hear what had been living inside her all along, and nothing would ever be the same. The community center had never looked so alive. Strings of white lights hung across the ceiling. Folding chairs filled the small auditorium in neat rows. A simple wooden stage stood at the front, and on it sat a polished black piano that had been rented for the evening. Lucia stood near the back entrance, watching people file in, families, neighbors, friends of the performers, children running between the aisles while their parents called after them. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter, and the rustling of coats being removed. She felt like she might be sick. Her daughter sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and holding a sign she had made that morning. It was decorated with glitter and stickers and said, "Go Mama," in big purple letters. Every few seconds, the little girl would turn around and scan the room, looking for her mother. When their eyes finally met, she waved so hard her whole body shook. Lucia smiled and waved back. But her hands were trembling. She looked down at her outfit. Nothing fancy. Just a simple dark blue dress she had found at a thrift store years ago. She had ironed it that morning, trying to make it look newer than it was. Her shoes were old but clean. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun. She didn't look like a performer. She looked like exactly what she was. A tired woman who worked at a dry cleaning shop and took the bus home every night. But tonight, she was going to show them something different. The showcase began at 7:00 sharp. Mr. Brennan walked onto the stage and welcomed everyone. He talked about the community center and how proud he was of all the students who had worked so hard throughout the year. Then the performances started. A group of children sang a holiday song, slightly off-key but full of joy. A teenage boy played guitar, and sang a popular love song. Two women performed a dance they had been practicing for months. A retired man played a simple melody on the piano while his grandchildren watched from the front row. One by one, the performers took the stage. Some were nervous. Some were confident. All of them received warm applause. Lucia watched from the back of the room, her heart beating faster with each passing minute. The list was getting shorter. Her name was getting closer. She thought about leaving, just slipping out the back door and disappearing into the night. No one would notice. No one would care. She could go home, take off this old dress, and pretend this whole thing had been a silly idea. But then she looked at her daughter again. The little girl was still holding up her sign, still watching the stage with wide eyes, still waiting for her mother's turn. Lucia couldn't leave. Not now. Not after everything. Finally, Mr. Brennan returned to the stage. He glanced at the paper in his hand, and for a brief moment, Lucia saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. Our final performer of the evening, he announced, is Lucia Reyes. A polite smattering of applause filled the room. A few of the piano students exchanged glances. They remembered her, the slow one, the woman who always sat in the back row and struggled with the basics. Lucia walked down the center aisle. Her legs felt heavy. The room seemed to stretch and blur around her. She could feel eyes on her, but she kept her gaze fixed on the piano. When she reached the stage, she climbed the 3 small steps and crossed to the bench. She sat down slowly and placed her hands in her lap. The room fell quiet. She looked out at the audience. Her daughter was leaning forward in her seat, the glitter sign clutched tightly in her small hands. Mr. Brennan stood off to the side, watching with a polite but uncertain expression. No one expected anything. She could see it in their faces. They were being kind, but they were already thinking about what came next. The refreshments. The conversations. The drive home. Lucia closed her eyes. She thought about the cardboard keyboard on her kitchen table, the late nights in the storage room, the aching fingers and the tired mornings and the countless hours of practice that no one ever saw. She thought about the woman she used to be, invisible, overlooked, just another face in the crowd. And she thought about the woman she had become. Then she opened her eyes, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade, No. 1 floated into the air, soft and tender, like a whisper in the dark. The room went still. A few people straightened in their seats. Mr. Brennan's mouth fell open slightly. Lucia didn't notice. She was somewhere else now, somewhere the audience couldn't follow. She was inside the music, living every note, feeling every rise and fall as if it were her own heartbeat. The melody grew. It swelled and twisted, climbing higher, pulling the listeners with it. Fingers that had once fumbled over simple scales now danced across the keys with grace and power. The piano sang beneath her hands, filling the room with sound that seemed too big for the small auditorium. People stopped breathing. Children stopped fidgeting. Even the little ones in the back grew quiet, sensing that something important was happening. Lucia played through the storm of the middle section, her hands flying across the keyboard, never missing a note. Then she brought it back down, gentle and aching, like the end of a long goodbye, when the final chord rang out and faded into silence. She lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest in her lap. For a moment, no one moved. Then her daughter stood up. The little girl started clapping, loud and wild, her glitter sign falling to the floor. A second later, the woman beside her stood. Then the man behind her. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The applause roared like a wave. People were cheering. Some were wiping their eyes. Mr. Brennan was clapping so hard his glasses nearly fell off his face. Lucia sat frozen on the bench, her vision blurred with tears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She couldn't believe what she had done. Her daughter broke free from the front row and ran up the steps to the stage. She threw her arms around her mother and squeezed tight. "You did it, Mama," she whispered. "You did the magic." Lucia held her daughter close and let the tears fall. She had spent so long hiding, so long doubting, so long believing that dreams were for other people, not for women like her. But tonight she had proven something to herself, something that no applause and no standing ovation could ever take away. It is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. She stood up, holding her daughter's hand, and looked out at the crowd still clapping for her. She saw neighbors who had watched her haul laundry, co-workers who had never known her secret, students who had once pitied her. And now they were all looking at her like she was someone new, because she was Lucia. Reyes smiled through her tears and took a small bow. And somewhere deep inside her heart, the music kept playing. It always would.